Hello and welcome to the Feminine Force with Carolyn and Lisa, your happy place to be. Thank you so much for joining us, whether you're watching the replay or you're here with us tonight or this morning, if you're Northern Hemisphere. We felt that we would talk about something that's very current and pressing at the moment. There's a lot of chaos in the world and a lot of chaos within many of us. And one of the things that's come up for us again and again recently are health situations with women. And we've been talking a lot, Carolyn and I, about how there's a lot of healing when women actually come back into their body, and how just as part of our culture, we've often been disconnected. I know from myself, it was like being taught not to really pay attention to what I was feeling and doing what I was told instead, like even though, like I remember I used to get made to kiss people, and sometimes I didn't feel safe kissing men. And it was like, but you're taught that you've got to kiss them before you go to sleep. So it's like all these things that we're taught for women, and the sexualization and the objectification of women, and how we disassociate from our bodies and our feelings, and how those feelings, the emotions that we haven't dealt with and the feelings, they don't actually leave our body. So even though it happens way back when, we have an emotional, the energy or the emotion of the trauma or the event that happened, if it's not processed at the time, we carry it around with us, and it actually becomes like a part of us that's almost shut down. And that energy being stored in that place keeps getting activated by some situations that we have in our present moment, even though it was on the past, because emotion doesn't pay attention to time. Emotion has no concept of time. It's just there. And over time, these areas in our body where we have stored emotion can develop into physical symptoms. And I believe, and from my experience and people I've worked with, that often these physical symptoms are like this call, this inner calling. Hey, you've got something to look at. There's something here. There's some healing that you need to do in this area. And it's almost like the body's intelligence knows that if this doesn't get released, like this is the next thing that needs to happen in our growth and is in our own evolution to our highest potential. And our body's intelligence calls us to that. And the call gets louder and louder and louder. And sometimes it's so loud that we get a big health scare and quite a shock. And I really wanted to bring that to the table tonight and have this conversation. And I know, Carolyn, you've had an experience with your tummy and things that happened there that was just the same, like this big shock that just got to the place where you could not ignore it anymore. And I'd love to hear that story, because I think we're not actually taught, like there's a lot more awareness now around the connection between the body and the mind and even the gut and the brain. Mm-hmm. But really, this is fairly new information for people, and this new way of thinking that all these parts of us are connected, and especially to our emotions. So I'd love you to share your story around that and how that sort of really impacted you in your life.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. And it's such an amazing conversation to be opening up, I think, for women to get into a deeper understanding of the relationship with their body, and the psychosomatic, as I talk about, there's a psycho, the mind, and the body, soma. In India, they call it that basically it's that they're linked, that I suppose we don't understand that sometimes, like how we're thinking, how things that we believe, and how we're kind of, the relationship we have with ourselves kind of shows up in the body. So for myself, I suppose, my personality type is I'm very empathic, I'm very Like my dad we used to joke about my dad is a psychiatric nurse, and he always used to say to me, "Oh, you make a lovely little nurse," and I used to get really cross because I was very women's liberation back when I was a teenager, and but actually he was right, like, because I have a very kind of caring side to me, so that means like I tend to love to look after people, and I love to kind of make everybody feel welcomed and warm and look after all their needs. But when that happens and gets to an extreme that you're not looking after your own needs, it starts to kind of, for me, especially when I started to, and I brought that personality into like the workplace, and then when you're working on a lot of deadlines, and I'm working on with design, I was working on tight deadlines and using my creativity, and I was working really, really hard and helping everything. I was so good at deadlines and meeting the brief and, really excelling in all those areas. But I was wondering why I was getting this kind of cramps in my stomach. I couldn't understand, like, why am I getting these cramps in my stomach? And it would happen. I didn't link it to kind of my external world, the kind of way. I just thought it was something I was eating. First of all, it was like, oh, I must be eating something unusual. That didn't really agree with me. And I started looking, and I'm so clueless. Like, I had no idea that it was a pressure that I was under, like that time pressure all the time, that I was always really looking ahead. I was always in the future. So there was anxiety there about deadlines and about, always having to measure up to be at really high standard, of my work and my presentations, and how I was delivering myself all the time, was having this effect on my physiology, So I wasn't really integrating my emotions. My emotions really didn't have any space, I didn't have any connection or understanding around that, like what I was actually feeling, because it was kind of mechanized, I was like a machine,
Yes,
I was just like a machine, basically. I was a doing all the time, and I felt fulfilled in a way because I was serving others. I was serving all the time, and so I felt I was fulfilled in that way, that maybe society was kind of, I had nearly been trained into as such. But what was really detrimental then was my health issues were getting worse and worse. And like everything I did, just when it came to diets, or when it came to kind of, analyzing your food again, that was another kind of taking an analytical viewpoint on the situation again, the kind of way, instead of feeling into what was happening. So then I started to understand. I was saying to myself, just came to me after trying lots of different things. I was like, I wonder if this is about my emotions, I think this could be something to do with, could be emotional, And I didn't realize then, began to watch myself, and to see like what happens when it's a conflict or something would happen in my personal life outside of work. How would I react? And I realized there was an activation in my body, that my gut would just go, go tight. So every time somebody would say something, or was a conflict, I had a fear of conflict. So every time there was kind of a conflict or a difficult situation, my stomach would just go tight. It would just constrict. So then that was causing, it actually caused irritable bowel syndrome and stuff. So that became then the kind of an automatic thing in my body. So my body then just automatically reacted that way, So I started to understand this, and I started to study mindfulness and neuroscience, and realize like that it was in that fear factor, it was in the fight and flight responses, and the body, when the mind is in that fight and flight responses, that's like a mirror. I used to think of it as like a mirror. My body and my mind is mirrored in my body. So everything that's happening in my mind is a mirror. My body is a mirror of that. So if my mind is kind of in fear, then my body is going to be in fear, and it'll react in a fearful way. And that's like to crunch up your gut, or your shoulders. And sometimes I get migraines, whatever. It would be all tight on my neck and everything like that. So it was showing up that way. And not until I started to understand that connection and the disconnection from my mind and body, and it was a really like a massive revelation to me, because I couldn't, it was a relief, because I realized, wow, like, why didn't I see that before? Why was I so disconnected from my body? Why did I not even have a sense in my body? So that kind of way, I just saw myself as a machine, a doer, like do everything for everyone. I was just here to serve everybody, and I didn't really have a connection with my own body, So then I started to kind of sit in meditation, and I started to find huge relief in my nervous system, like calming my nervous system down. That had a huge effect on my stomach and how calm my stomach was, and my disposition. I always have a kind of calm personality anyway, but the activation of a conflict or whatever, that decreased. So whenever then have somebody who's difficult or anything that's difficult now, my body doesn't respond in the same way. I don't actually have that kind of clenching anymore with the body. It's more ease. There's no. So I've kind of trained my body into a state of ease, more ease. And then. But it's been actually through using like the keys that you have in your book as well, that the pause and the creating that space around. My reaction would have been actually pushing my emotions down, and suppressing my emotions. Each time something would happen, I would suppress it. So instead of that, now I would feel my emotions and not let that affect my body,
Just lost a bit of Wi-Fi then, I think.
Yeah.
I think that it's really interesting, because as I'm hearing you share this story, I'm reflecting on my own incapacity to actually listen to my body. Like, now I listen. Now if something is wrong and there's a pain or there's something, I'll get a feeling, and I'll be like, like about a few weeks ago, I just really felt like I needed to go on a fast, and like even listening to my body and actually doing that, it was easy. It wasn't, I have to go on a fast for this. It was not a head thing. It was like my body had given me this indication. And even things like I had a sore shoulder, like just listening to that and really feeling into it, and not necessarily knowing what it was about, but then intuitively going, actually, I think I need to see an acupuncturist for this. So I've even started to do that sort of a work with my body, like more and more coming into trusting my body's natural intelligence and my body's immune system, and treating it like it does have an intelligence that can communicate with me, which I never once before ever thought. And it is, like I am having feelings. I am feeling certain things that I need to not eat, or certain things that I do of a morning that are a bit of a routine now, like but sometimes my body would just go, you just don't need to exercise today, but not from a place of, laziness or slothfulness, but more I can just feel things in my body that I never used to feel, because I was so shut down. I was so disconnected from my body. And, and I think that bringing us back into the feelings that we have, like paying attention to the feelings, and really acknowledging them in the moment that they come up, so that they don't have to get suppressed and become areas of vulnerability for us, or areas where there's trapped energy, because that's often what happens, and then that can create illness. And it's funny because there's a lot of, well, not funny, but there's a lot of research done now about the connection. And I had this interesting experience. If you've heard about women, not women, but you've heard about colonics and how you can go and get a colonic. So I met a lady who had a, what do you call them, not a studio, but a colonic business. And she's been doing it for 20 years. And she said, do you know what I've noticed? And I said, what? She said, because she massages as there's release that happens in the colonic. And she said, and what I notice is I can feel tension and lumps in the gut. And she said, and what I've been practicing like over these 20 years, I know that if there's a lump in this section of the bowel, it has to do with grief. And she said, and if I get there and I press that area and I say to the client, and, have you lost anyone recently? She said, every time when that person speaks it, she said things like, if I say, oh, and have you had any loss lately? And she said, what happens is I say, oh yeah, I lost my mum last year, and oh, it was really sad. And as they speak it, she said the lump releases.
Wow. Isn't that
Yeah.
amazing?
So she has actually drawn a map of the bowel and where each emotion is stored in the bowel. And I'm like, the lower intestine, you know, like all that lower area. Just like, that's unbelievable. So this is the sort of work that's being done now by people that's only going to get more and more mainstream, you know, and it really is incredible. Like, and even like I know sometimes if I have a scratchy throat or, you know, I'm aware, what is it that I ask myself, is there anything I'm not speaking? Is there anywhere that I'm not being true to myself? Is there anywhere that I'm not being, you know, speaking what I need to speak honestly? Am I filtering something, you know, like, and I do see connections, like I see connections.
Absolutely. Actually, it's funny what you said about the speaking, because before I started to kind of write, you know, and do my, you know, find my true voice, as I call it, I actually got acne all around my neck. Like all of a sudden, like I didn't, like unusual place to get it. Like where would you get acne? And you know, and I was like, what is going on? It was kind of boils and different things happen. What is going on? Like, you know, I couldn't understand it, but I didn't have any understanding of that. Now I've kind of studied a lot of research about the body and mind, you know, combination and the different chakras and what's happening and stuff like that. But it cleared up completely then when I started expressing myself through my writing and everything like that. It was like it was trying to come through, but it was like some resistance, you know. And like that, it's so interesting, you know, because when your body is speaking to you that way, it's like, you know, it'll tell you. Now I trust it completely. Like I really trust my body, you know, I trust what my body feels like around people, you know, and it's self-protective as well, you know, because when you start, before I would have ignored that, because I think what happens is like there's a dis-ease in the body because we're in conflict. It's like a conflict zone within our bodies, because we know, we have this knowing, like the feminine force we're talking about, but then society is telling us, no, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this, and you're kind of, no, I feel this, I feel this. But that's why there's a kind of a conflict there, because you're going against your own knowing, and it has this kind of battle, creates this kind of battle in the body that just creates this disease in different areas, you know. And if it's not addressed, it can become like a chronic illness. And it's not that people, you know, because people talk about the medical model and the kind of holistic model. I think when things get to a stage where things are actually become an actual disease, they need, you know, proper medical attention. But for prevention, it's brilliant to start getting those kind of, you know, that body work done, or like you say, acupuncture, or, you know, there's so many different treatments that are there and available, you know, for releasing those kind of built up emotions, really, aren't they?
Yeah,
you know?
It's true. And there's so many different treatments now for so many things that we have thought there is no alternative for, you know, like, so I think the body's intelligence knows which way to go and how to go if we can get out of the fear. And that's the other thing that I wanted to talk about now. It's almost like, I think that especially if something big happens, the fear or the shock or the grief of that, and we often, you know, I've sort of, because I want to have a chat about this, because I think we have had this medical model that does make us feel like we're taking a very big risk if we trust our feelings over giving the responsibility for our health to the medical industry. And in some cases, in some cases there's an absolute requirement for, you know, having medical intervention. I just think that if I'm making that decision from fear, if I'm afraid and I want to be saved and I want to be fixed, and I'm too scared to go and have a look at the alternatives, I'm actually giving my authority over, and I'm not really empowered in that decision. And the medical model then takes me and does what it needs to do to me according to its parameters. but that actually may not be what I need. But the thing is, I couldn't get any clarity about what I needed because I was in fear. So I wanted to really bring this up because not only are we talking about emotion that creates illness, but how illness can create an emotion in us, and how
So
if we
true, yeah.
use that emotion as if we use the emotion as an impetus to understand ourselves and to come into contact with the body and to actually look at the behaviors and the patterns that we're running that don't serve us, and to come into more of an intuitive state, into clarity, and to allow the feelings, allow the feelings to come up and validate them. Of course, you're going to feel fear, and then bring yourself back into an empowered state, and actually considering options, like actually feeling confident and trusting yourself enough to be open to not just doing what you're told to do, But you can't really do that until you've dealt with the emotion. You can't come into that trusting state of the emerging process if you're in fear.
Yeah, that's really interesting actually, because even I was thinking even last night, I was saying to myself that sometimes like medical, health issues are like an awakening as well. People say they have these awakenings, like a spiritual awakening, or they have these, relationship breakdowns or something like that that kind of wakes them up. But there's also like this health, it can come in all different forms, where it's kind of trying to break you out of a cycle of a pattern that you've been living through, and it could be something that your family's been living through. And what's really interesting is that when you look, people say that, oh, this symptom or this kind of medical condition runs in my family. But what's running in the family is a pattern. It's not the medical condition.
Yes. Yeah. Interesting. Yes.
It's the actual medical. It's not. It's actually a tendency of the characteristic of a personality that becomes a dis-ease in the body, and because that characteristic and that way of living and that way of thinking, that way of being isn't resolved, it's in the pattern, in the trans kind of personal, the dynamic, that it gets passed on to the next generation, and then that shows up again. So it's not until you realize that, then you start to do the work, or you start to get curious. Because for myself, it wasn't the medical model that helped me. It was you just get given some tablets that might help, relax the gut. It helps. It definitely helps, and peppermints and stuff like that. All those kind of things help. But was a trait in my family, that there was ulcers and there was gastro problems and stuff because of anxiety, actually, to do with anxiety, and living with it. And that's passed on to epigenetics, so it's not something that you can say, oh, I'm just not going to. You have to have an understanding of your family pattern. Look at the personality types and how is that showing up in kind of their illnesses, and what's really important, and really in Ireland, I have to say, I just recently heard somebody saying about, yourself, Lisa, or somebody else, about emotions that are held on the heart, around the heart area, and affects the lungs. Somebody was saying that, and I noticed actually in Ireland, like, we have huge problems with asthma, and and we have huge problems with not being connected with our emotions because of our past history, and it's to do with oppression and things being held down, and we've had to hold things down, and we've had to hold our emotions down for our safety, that kind of way. So to me, I think it's amazing to think that if you were to tap into the emotions, like how that could help the breathing, and I've noticed that with my own daughter, like once I kind of started doing the work and the environment in the home changed, and there was more self-expression and more openness, that her asthma disappeared. Like, she doesn't, it's just like, I don't really need it, and where every year would have been a big issue, it's still just a little bit of there still, but it's not chronic the way it used to be, and it was getting worse and worse. So like, there is so much in that how are we in touch with our emotions? Because it's really logical. It's really logical when you think about it. Like, you're restricting the flow of the energy of your body through their mind, because your mind is doing all that. then you're going to stop the natural flow. It's like the flow and fluidity within the body. The movement of energy, the movement of emotions, the movement of life is motion. It's in movement, and like that's part. The body is part of that, like we're part of the whole interconnected, interdependent system, and anything that's tight and closed off is going to become like, even cancerous or, some kind of a sister boy, it always starts like that. In some kind of, it starts in a tight spot, in a tight little, you say a lump or something like that. It's like this little tight constriction. So it's really, it's so important and so interesting to start looking into that and to start having a deeper understanding around emotions and the body, how that can affect over time, and the fact that it can be to do with your patterns of your family and your own personality, and that kind of self-inquiry and knowing yourself is just vitally important, isn't it?
Oh, I think so. And I think that coming into that sense of inner knowing and inner trust, I think that's essential if you have got health issues, because what other way through is there? There's this way of fear and terror and, but that's only going to make things worse. So it's like really, for me, it's like thinking about that, and I haven't had to be in a situation like that, thankfully, but when I've spoken to people, it's what I'm noticing is it's coming to an acceptance, somehow coming to some sort of acceptance and trust that this is happening for a purpose, and going with the flow and not resistance. Because if you think, even in resistance, what we create is tension. And it's the same in any of our relationships. What we resist creates more tension and more conflict. And if we're creating tension and conflict in the body where there already is something out of balance, it makes sense that it can't actually be helpful for our healing. So whatever we need to do to come to an acceptance around the emotion that we're feeling, so that we can move and do the next thing and do the next thing and do the next thing, and just, it's all, and like you said, there is a wake up for, and there are so many stories, aren't there, in so many books of people that have had like fatal illnesses, and it's been an awakening, and they've just decided they're going to totally change the way of being and totally get in touch with their emotions and heal and fix their relationships, and they end up living forever and ever. It's like this is documented evidence. So really, I think that our awareness and the work that we do on our emotions now, so that we feel like we can take control of our emotions, not be in control, but the better we know ourselves and understand our emotions and how they work, the more we can really take control when big shit happens in our lives. And we want to be able to do that, So, I think it's a very, very timely conversation. We're being called.
We're seeing it more and more again, isn't it? Because I suppose we're curious about it, and it's showing up more and more. And I definitely think that women, it's for men and women, but I think for women, there's more of a, I feel, maybe I'm wrong, and it would be actually great to have a man on and talk about that connection. I'd love to have that conversation with a man to see like their relationship with their body opposed to a women's relationship to their body, and how connected we are and how we feel. I suppose from having a son as well, and a daughter, I can see the difference in how he kind of celebrates his body. He has a great, he loves it, because it's the muscular side of things and building it up and training. And, I just feel when I see that, I go, wow, that's amazing. And I know a lot of women are very into fitness as well, but the deeper understanding of it, I'm just wondering, curious about, how in touch are they with the emotional body, the emotional sense of themselves in their body. I'd love to have that conversation. So maybe we'll invite somebody on, Lisa.
Yes.
Somebody would be interested in talking about that.
Yeah, I think so too.
Yeah.
So we feel that we would highly like to encourage you to get in touch with your emotions and to have an open mind about what might be happening to you health-wise if you don't already, because there are connections. And the listening, you know, the meditation, sitting in meditation, that's something that I've actually done quite a lot that I'll share, is when I have something going on in my body, I'll often sit in meditation and I'll just really focus on that part of my body and take my awareness in, and I just ask questions. And often I might get a vision, or I might get a feeling, or I might, you know, like I'll find out about what's going on there just from actually really bringing my awareness to that part and being open to hearing what's going on. And often I get surprised at what I find.
It's not
Really?
what you thought.
And it's like, really? It's about that? Like, I've had situations where it's like I just get an image of me as a child doing something that I'd completely forgotten about, and then I can see the link between what's happening in my body and that emotional situation back then, like things like that I've just gone, wow, like how could I didn't even remember that?
Because
You know,
it's like
so
emotions are sometimes memories, aren't they? You know, as well, they're kind of trapped emotions, like a trapped memory that needs to be felt now because it wasn't felt properly back then. They can release it, you know. So it's really, I call it the archaeology, you know, because we're digging down into those areas, and then you get such relief. And for me, it's amazing, because again, I'm always mad about creativity, but every time I do that and I do more work, I get more inspiration. I was like, Lisa, we'll be talking about something, you know, in our that we're uncovering in our inner world, and then I'd say the next day, Lisa, I've got great insight about this new idea, a new direction, and just got clarity. I know what to do, you know. So it's just so linked, isn't it?
it's like you're creating more space inside you, right?
Yeah. For that inspiration.
It's so good. It's so
amazing.
good. It's so good. So we hope that this has helped, like the little meditation practice, the paying attention to the feelings, and that's the keys that we talk about all the time, just pausing in that moment and being aware of the feeling, because before the reaction, before the anger or the resentment or the frustration, there is another feeling that happens that, because you're not aware of it, we can jump into a dynamic which repeats over and over again. But that being able to feel the feeling in the moment and just, I'm having a feeling now, like, what is this feeling? And getting into it and validating it, because really we all have feelings. You don't have to act out on it, but just allowing it, acknowledging it to be there, allows it to process in that moment. And then you come into an emerging process. You don't have to keep re-feeling that old feeling, because you're actually letting it out in the moment. You have an opportunity to free yourself from the repetitive cycle and come into an emerging new creative moment.
Yeah, beautiful. That's a gorgeous way to end. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Lisa. Beautiful
Thanks, everyone.
Again. And thank you for everybody listening. And there's a thumbs up there as somebody's listening, watching in, and anyone who's listening on the playback. And we'll be back on Friday. So can't wait to see you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks again.
We're on our new times.
So, we are on our new times.
Yeah, so 11 a.m. in Ireland and 7, is it?
On Friday, I think it's going to be different. Friday, it's going to be your Friday night and my Saturday morning. Otherwise, Mondays and Wednesdays, it's 11 a.m. Irish and 8 p.m. in Australia.
Sydney, cool.
So I'll write that somewhere one day when I remember. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thanks a lot. See you again. Bye.